What happens when the daughter society mocks becomes the woman an immortal worships? Tonight we enter Victorian Bath, 1898, where 22-year-old Serafina Cole has spent her entire life being humiliated for her size. Too large for fashionable clothing, too round for society's beauty standards, too substantial for her wealthy family's reputation. Her mother arranges reducing diets that leave her constantly hungry. Her sisters mock her openly at social gatherings. Suitors pursue her younger, slimmer siblings while treating Serafina like she's invisible. Or worse, like she's a joke to be shared among cruel young men who wager on who can pretend interest in the fat Cole daughter most convincingly. At her sister's engagement ball, Serafina overhears her own father telling guests he's ashamed to have a daughter whose appearance reflects so poorly on the family name, that he'd pay any man willing to marry her just to remove the embarrassment from his household. Humiliated beyond bearing, Serafina flees the ball and collapses in the estate gardens, sobbing in the darkness, wishing she could disappear entirely. But she's found by someone unexpected, Dante Ravenswood, who isn't attending the ball as a guest, but observing from shadows as he's done for weeks, drawn by presence he couldn't ignore. Because Dante isn't human, he's an 8,000-year-old alpha vampire who's spent millennia observing how different cultures define beauty, and he recognizes what Victorian society cannot see. Serafina's body represents classical perfection that artists have celebrated for thousands of years. He's not embarrassed by her appearance. He's awed by it. And he's definitely not letting cruel humans destroy someone whose form he considers divine. The fat daughter who society humiliates is about to discover that true appreciation comes from someone who's seen enough of history to recognize genuine beauty when he finds it. Subscribe now, because this story will prove that those mocked by limited minds are often celebrated by those with vision broad enough to see past temporary fashion. Serafina Cole stood in the corner of her sister Carolyn's engagement ball, trying to make herself invisible despite knowing that someone her size could never truly disappear. At 22, she'd perfected the art of social invisibility, arriving late, leaving early, positioning herself behind pillars or in alcoves where her presence wouldn't draw attention. But tonight, invisibility failed spectacularly. "I heard Lord Ashworth accepted a wager," one young man said loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear. £20 if he could convince the fat Cole daughter to believe he was courting her seriously. Can you imagine? As if anyone would genuinely want. Serafina turned away before hearing the rest, her face burning with humiliation. This wasn't the first time she'd been the subject of such wagers. Cruel young men found sport in pretending interest, in making her hope briefly before revealing the joke. She'd learned to recognize the signs, the too intense attention, the exaggerated compliments, the laughter barely contained behind polite masks. "Serafina, darling, you're not eating again?" Her mother, Lady Margaret, appeared with disapproving expression. "Dr. Fletcher said strict adherence to the reducing diet was essential. If you'd simply show some discipline." "I haven't eaten anything," Serafina replied quietly. "I'm just standing here." "Well, don't stand so prominently," her mother hissed. "You're blocking the musicians. Go stand somewhere less obvious, less visible, less present." That had been Serafina's life for 22 years, being told in countless ways that her body was wrong, shameful, something to hide. She moved toward the garden doors, seeking escape from the ballroom's oppressive judgment. But as she passed a group of older guests, her father's voice stopped her cold. "Quite frankly, an embarrassment," Lord Edward Cole was saying. "My other daughters are beautiful, marriageable, but Serafina, I'd pay any man willing to take her off my hands. Her size reflects poorly on the family. People assume we're feeding her to excess, though God knows we've tried every reducing method available. Perhaps she's simply suited to spinsterhood, someone suggested diplomatically. Perhaps she's simply a burden I'm tired of bearing, her father replied bluntly. At this point, I'd settle for any arrangement that removes her from my household. Convent, distant relative, employment far from Bath. Anything to stop having to explain why one daughter is so fundamentally different from her sisters. Serafina felt something break inside her chest. She'd known her family found her appearance embarrassing. But hearing her own father discuss her as a burden to be disposed of, hearing him openly state his shame, it was more than she could bear. She fled through the garden doors, running blindly into darkness, not caring about propriety or appearances or anything except escaping the crushing weight of their judgment. She collapsed finally behind a hedge, away from the ballroom's light and music, and sobbed with abandon she never allowed in public. 22 years, she whispered to the darkness. 22 years of being told I'm wrong, that my body is shameful, that I'm an embarrassment to everyone who has to acknowledge my existence. Why? Why am I made this way if it's so terrible? Because you're not made wrong, a male voice said from the shadows. Society's standards are wrong, and I'm about to prove it to you. Serafina startled, looking around frantically for the source of the voice. A figure emerged from deeper shadows, a man who moved with predatory grace that suggested danger and control simultaneously. He was striking, tall with black hair, unusual silver eyes, and features that seemed both beautiful and ancient. He wore evening clothes, but somehow looked foreign in them, as if costumes from different eras would suit him equally well. "Who are you?" Serafina asked, trying to compose herself despite her tear-stained face. "Dante Ravenswood," he replied, moving closer with fluid motion that didn't seem entirely human. "And you're Serafina Cole, the daughter your family is too blind to appreciate. I've been observing you for weeks, drawn by your presence in ways I couldn't ignore. Tonight, hearing your father's words, I decided intervention was necessary." "You've been watching me?" Serafina asked, uncertain whether to be flattered or disturbed. "I have," Dante confirmed without apology. "Because, Serafina, I'm not human. I'm a vampire, 8,000 years old, and I've observed how beauty standards shift across millennia. What your society currently deems unacceptable, other cultures have celebrated as perfection. Your body, the curves, the softness, the abundant flesh your family treats as shameful, represents classical ideal that artists have worshipped for thousands of years." "You're saying I'm a vampire?" Serafina asked, confused. "No, I'm saying I'm a vampire," Dante clarified with slight smile. "You're human. But you're also my destined mate, and I recognize what your limited society cannot see. That your appearance isn't defective. It's divine. Literally. Goddesses have been depicted with your body type for millennia. Renaissance masters painted women with your proportions as ideal beauty. Your family's rejection of you reflects their narrow perspective, not any actual flaw in you." "You're either mad or mocking me," Serafina said bitterly. "I've heard enough false compliments from men making wagers." "I'm not making wagers or false compliments," Dante interrupted firmly. "I'm stating objective historical fact. In ancient Greece, women with your build were considered blessed by Aphrodite. In Renaissance Italy, you would have been sought after as the perfect model, Titian would have begged to paint you. In numerous cultures I've observed across 8 millennia, your body type has been celebrated as the pinnacle of feminine beauty. Victorian England happens to be experiencing temporary fashion for extreme thinness, but that's aberration, not absolute truth. Then why does everyone treat me like I'm grotesque? Serafina asked quietly. Because humans have remarkably short memories, Dante replied. They accept current fashion as absolute truth, forgetting that standards change constantly. 50 years ago, your figure would have been admired. 50 years from now, fashion will shift again. But Serafina, regardless of changing human standards, I've seen enough of history to recognize beauty that transcends temporary trends. And you are genuinely, objectively, extraordinarily beautiful. You expect me to believe that? Serafina challenged. A stranger appears in a garden, claims to be an ancient vampire, and declares, "I'm beautiful," when my entire life has taught me otherwise. I don't expect you to believe it immediately, Dante said. I expect to prove it to you, starting now. Come with me, Serafina. Let me show you what you look like through eyes that have actually seen enough of beauty to recognize it. Despite her skepticism, Serafina found herself following Dante away from the ball, toward his carriage waiting beyond the estate grounds. Perhaps it was desperation. After her father's words, remaining at home felt impossible. Perhaps it was curiosity about this strange man who spoke with such certainty. Or perhaps it was simply that for once, someone was treating her appearance as valuable rather than shameful. Dante took her to his residence, an elegant townhouse filled with artwork from various eras. And it was the artwork that began shifting Serafina's perspective. Look at this, Dante said, gesturing to a Renaissance painting. Titian's Venus of Urbino. Notice her proportions? The soft stomach, the full thighs, the roundness of her arms? This was painted as the ideal of beauty. Not a compromise or making do, the actual ideal that artists strive to capture. Serafina studied the painting, seeing a woman whose body did resemble her own. Not identical, but similar proportions, curves and softness that Victorian society deemed excessive. And this, Dante continued, showing her a Greek sculpture. Aphrodite of Cnidos, considered the most beautiful representation of the goddess. Again, notice the soft belly, the substantial hips, the flesh that speaks of abundance rather than deprivation. He showed her artwork from dozens of cultures, Indian sculptures of voluptuous goddesses, Japanese paintings celebrating curved women, African art depicting substantial female figures as symbols of fertility and beauty. In culture after culture, era after era, women with bodies like Serafina's were celebrated rather than shamed. Your Victorian society is experiencing collective delusion, Dante explained. They've decided that extreme thinness represents beauty, ignoring thousands of years of human history showing otherwise. It's temporary fashion, Serafina, meaningless in the grand scope of aesthetic appreciation. But it's my reality, Serafina protested. Whether it's temporary or not, I have to live in this society that finds me unacceptable. No, you don't, Dante corrected. You could leave, come with me, travel to places where your body would be admired rather than mocked. Or better, accept vampire transformation and leave human society entirely. Supernatural beings don't share human obsessions with specific body types. We value strength, capability, character. Your appearance would be irrelevant among vampires, though I personally find it stunning. You keep saying that, Serafina said. That you find me beautiful. Why should I believe you, Com? Because I've spent 8,000 years observing beauty in all its forms, Dante replied simply. I've watched standards shift constantly. What's celebrated in one era is mocked in another. What's desired in one culture is rejected in another. But through all that variation, certain aesthetics recur. The classical proportions you possess appear repeatedly across history as ideals. You're not outside beauty standards. You're aligned with standards that have endured far longer than Victorian fashion. My family would say you're either lying or have terrible taste, Serafina observed. Your family has vision limited to their immediate social circle and current decade, Dante countered. I have perspective spanning millennia and continents. Whose assessment do you think is more accurate? People who've seen one narrow standard, or someone who's observed thousands? I want to believe you, Serafina admitted. But 22 years of being told I'm wrong is difficult to overcome with artwork and historical examples. Then let me prove it another way, Dante suggested. Let me show you that genuine desire, not wagers or mockery, but authentic attraction, looks different from what you've experienced. Over the following weeks, Dante methodically rebuilt Serafina's understanding of her own worth. Not through empty compliments, but through demonstrating that his appreciation was genuine and consistent. He commissioned a portrait of her, not a polite painting that minimized her size, but an artwork that celebrated her body exactly as it was. The artist he hired had studied Renaissance masters and painted Serafina as if she were a goddess, reclining with classical grace, her curves highlighted rather than hidden, her expression serene rather than apologetic. "This is how I see you," Dante said when the portrait was complete. "Not despite your size, but celebrating it. Your body is magnificent, Serafina. The way light plays across your curves, the softness that suggests comfort and abundance, the proportion that's pleased human eyes for thousands of years. You're not tolerably attractive. You're genuinely stunning." But more meaningful than the portrait was how Dante treated her daily. He never suggested she should eat less, never implied her body needed changing, never made comments about her size except to express appreciation. When they dined together, he encouraged her to eat fully without guilt. When they walked, he never implied she should move faster or differently. When they spoke, he focused on her thoughts rather than her appearance. But when discussing appearance, his appreciation was unmistakable. "Your family treated your body as something to apologize for," Dante observed one evening. "They made you feel that existing in your natural form was imposing your presence on others who had to tolerate seeing you. That's psychological abuse, Serafina. Subtle, perhaps, but abuse nonetheless. They convinced you that your physical form was inherently wrong, when the only thing wrong was their inability to recognize beauty outside narrow parameters. It's hard to unlearn 22 years of conditioning," Serafina admitted. "Even when you show me historical examples, even when you express genuine appreciation, part of me still believes I'm fundamentally wrong, that my body is shameful." "That's normal," Dante assured her. "Healing from that kind of sustained psychological damage takes time. But Serafina, every day you're with me, you're receiving counter-evidence to what your family taught you. Eventually, the new evidence will outweigh the old conditioning. You'll start believing that maybe, possibly, you're not defective, that maybe your family's standards were flawed rather than your body being wrong." "Do you really think I'm beautiful?" Serafina asked quietly. "Or are you being kind because we're supposedly destined mates?" "I think you're one of the most beautiful women I've encountered in 8,000 years, Dante stated firmly. "The mate bond means I recognize you as compatible, but attraction is separate from that recognition. Serafina, I desire you, genuinely, intensely, consistently. Your curves, your softness, your substantial presence, all of it appeals to me aesthetically and physically. I'm not being kind. I'm being honest about what I find attractive. No one has ever wanted me before, Serafina whispered. Plenty of people have wanted you, Dante corrected. They just never expressed it because society taught them to hide aesthetic preferences that don't align with current fashion. But in cultures where your body type is celebrated, you'd have dozens of genuine suitors. Your appeal isn't subjective opinion, it's objective fact that most of your society has been trained to deny. I want to believe you, Serafina said. Truly, I do. But it's hard. Then I'll keep proving it, Dante promised. However long it takes, Juan. 3 months after meeting Dante, Serafina returned to her family's estate to collect her belongings. She'd been living with Dante as his companion, finally experiencing what it felt like to exist without constant judgment. But seeing her family again reminded her viscerally of the cruelty she'd endured. Serafina, you've returned, her mother said with barely concealed distaste. Though I notice you haven't lost any weight. I suppose we shouldn't have expected discipline from you. I'm not here to discuss my weight, Serafina replied with calm she'd developed over months with Dante. I'm here to collect my possessions. I'm moving out permanently. Moving where? Her father demanded. No respectable household would hire someone your size. I'm not seeking employment, Serafina interrupted. I'm living with someone who actually values me. Someone who sees beauty where you see only shame. That's impossible, Carolyn sneered. What man would genuinely want you? Unless, is this some desperate arrangement where you're paying him to pretend interest? He's neither pretending nor being paid, Serafina stated. He's someone who has broader perspective than your limited social circle. Someone who's seen enough of beauty to recognize it in forms you can't appreciate. Dante appeared in the doorway then, his presence commanding attention immediately. I'm the someone in question, Dante Ravenswood, and I'm not interested in your family's assessment of Serafina's appearance. I'm here to ensure she retrieves her belongings without further psychological abuse. Psychological abuse? Lady Margaret protested. We've done nothing but try to help her. You've spent 22 years convincing her that her natural body is shameful, Dante interrupted coldly. You've made her feel that existing in her own flesh is imposing burden on others. You've treated her appearance as embarrassment, requiring correction rather than simply different aesthetic from current fashion. That's not help. That's systematic destruction of self-worth. And it stops now. Who are you to lecture us? Lord Edward demanded. Someone who's observed enough of human history to recognize your current beauty standards as temporary fashion rather than absolute truth, Dante replied. Someone who's seen dozens of eras where Serafina's body type was celebrated as ideal. Someone with enough perspective to understand that your assessment of her is catastrophically wrong and reflects only your own limited vision. She's fat, Caroline stated bluntly. That's not fashion or perspective. That's objective fact. She has a classical body type that artists have celebrated for millennia, Dante corrected. Renaissance masters would have competed to paint her. Greek sculptors would have used her as model for goddesses. Your inability to recognize her beauty says everything about your limitations and nothing about her actual appearance. This is absurd, Lord Edward protested. No reasonable person would find. I'm not interested in your definition of reasonable, Dante interrupted. I'm interested in ensuring Serafina understands that your assessment of her worth is meaningless. You had 22 years to appreciate an extraordinary daughter, and you wasted that opportunity through shallow obsession with fashionable body types. That's your failure, not hers. Now Serafina is collecting her things and leaving. You can accept that gracefully or make it difficult. Either way, she's done accepting your judgment. Thank you, Serafina whispered to Dante as they left with her belongings, for saying what I couldn't. You'll be able to say it yourself eventually, Dante assured her. You're already stronger than they ever acknowledged. 6 months after leaving her family, Dante raised the question of vampire transformation. They'd grown close over months of Serafina rebuilding self-worth under his patient support. But the practical question of her future required discussion. I need to ask about your long-term plans, Dante said during one of their evening conversations. You're thriving away from your family's judgment. You're confident, happy, genuinely comfortable in your own body for the first time. But we need to discuss permanent arrangements. Do you want to remain human, or are you interested in vampire transformation? What would transformation mean? Serafina asked. 3 days of pain as your body transforms into something supernatural, Dante explained honestly. You'd gain abilities beyond human limitations, strength, speed, enhanced senses. You'd need to feed on blood regularly. But most relevant to your specific circumstances, you'd become immune to human beauty standards entirely. Vampire society doesn't share human obsessions with specific body types. We value capability and character. Your appearance would be irrelevant except to those who find it aesthetically pleasing, like me. Would my body change during transformation? Serafina asked carefully. Slightly, Dante confirmed. Vampire transformation typically makes people more conventionally attractive by universal standards. More symmetrical features, clearer skin, that sort of thing. But your fundamental build wouldn't change. You'd still have the curves and proportions you currently possess. You'd just be a vampire version of your current self. So I'd still be fat, Serafina stated bluntly. You'd still have a classical body type that I find extraordinarily beautiful, Dante corrected. And you'd be living in supernatural society where no one would care about your size. You'd be judged on your abilities and character, rather than how closely you match current human fashion. That sounds appealing, Serafina admitted. After 22 years of judgment, the idea of existing where my appearance is irrelevant, or even appreciated, is tempting. But Dante, I don't want to transform just to escape human standards. I want to choose from position of actually believing I'm valuable as I am, rather than fleeing from society that finds me unacceptable. That's wise, Dante agreed. You've made tremendous progress rebuilding self-worth. But 6 months isn't enough to fully heal from 22 years of conditioning. I'd recommend waiting longer, giving yourself time to genuinely believe you're beautiful before deciding about transformation. Make this choice from confidence rather than desperation to escape judgment. How long should I wait? Serafina wondered. However long you need, Dante replied. Maybe another year, maybe 5, maybe longer. There's no deadline. I've waited 8,000 years for my mate. I can wait a few more years for you to be certain. Besides, watching you continue developing confidence and self-appreciation is genuinely satisfying. I'm in no rush to end that process. But the mate bond, doesn't that mean we should be together as vampires? Serafina asked. The mate bond creates extraordinary compatibility, Dante explained. It means relationship between us is deeper than typical partnerships, but it doesn't require immediate transformation. You can take all the time you need to decide what you actually want, rather than rushing into immortality because of supernatural connection. Thank you for being patient, Serafina said softly. Most people would pressure me to decide quickly. Most people haven't spent 8 millennia learning that worthwhile things take time, Dante replied. Your well-being matters more than my preferences, always. 1 year after meeting Dante, Serafina had transformed psychologically in ways that had nothing to do with vampire nature. She'd gone from believing her body was shameful to genuinely accepting, even celebrating, her appearance. The shift happened gradually through countless small moments. Dante commissioned multiple artworks of her in various styles: Renaissance paintings, Greek sculptures, modern portraits, all depicting her body as beautiful rather than something to be minimized. He took her to museums and showed her how women with her proportions were depicted as goddesses, as ideals, as perfection itself throughout history. But more meaningful than historical validation was how Dante treated her daily. He expressed genuine physical desire, not performance or obligation, but authentic attraction to her specific body. The way he looked at her curves, touched her softness, appreciated her substantial presence, it all communicated that his attraction wasn't despite her size, but because of it. I love your body, Dante told her one evening with absolute sincerity. Not an abstract, all bodies are beautiful way, though that's true. But specifically, personally, I find your curves extraordinarily attractive. The softness of your stomach, the way your hips curve, the abundance of your presence. All of it appeals to me aesthetically and physically. You're not tolerably attractive despite being large. You're stunning because of how you're built. I'm starting to believe you, Serafina admitted. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. When I look in mirrors now, I don't immediately see something shameful. I see a body that you find beautiful, that historical artists celebrated, that exists as valid aesthetic choice rather than failure to meet standards. That's tremendous progress, Dante observed with clear pride. But the real test came when Serafina encountered her former society at a public event. Ladies who'd once pitied her openly stared at her confidence. Men who'd made wagers about her now showed genuine interest that she recognized as authentic rather than cruel sport. Miss Cole, you look remarkably well, one gentleman said. The same man who'd once wagered on convincing her of false courtship. Might I request a dance? No, thank you, Serafina replied with calm dignity. I'm here with someone who actually appreciates me rather than mocking my appearance for entertainment. I didn't mean— You absolutely did mean, Serafina interrupted. You made wagers about pretending interest in the fat Cole daughter. You thought my size made me so desperate for attention that I'd fall for obvious deception. But I'm no longer that insecure girl who believed she should be grateful for any attention, even cruel attention. I've learned my worth, and it far exceeds anything you could offer. She returned to Dante, who'd been watching the interaction with approval. That was magnificent, he said. You've gone from believing their assessment to recognizing it as the limited perspective it always was. I learned from you, Serafina replied. You showed me that my family's standards weren't absolute truth, that people with broader perspective could recognize beauty they missed, that my body wasn't wrong. Their vision was too narrow to see it clearly. You've reclaimed your power, Dante observed. The power to define your own worth rather than accepting others' limited assessments. That's revolutionary growth, Serafina. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me too, Serafina said with genuine smile. Finally, 18 months after meeting Dante, Serafina made her decision about transformation. She was 24 now, genuinely confident in her own worth, and ready for whatever came next. "I want transformation," she told Dante one evening. "Not because I'm fleeing human standards or desperate to escape judgment, but because I've experienced human existence as a fat woman. I've rebuilt self-worth that society tried to destroy, and I'm ready to spend eternity with someone who sees me as a goddess rather than embarrassment. I'm choosing this from strength, not desperation." Dante studied her carefully. "You're absolutely certain? You've achieved remarkable confidence as human. You don't need vampire transformation to have value or escape judgment anymore. You genuinely believe you're beautiful now. I can see that in how you carry yourself." "Exactly," Serafina confirmed. "I'm not choosing transformation to become someone different. I'm choosing it to enhance who I already am, to spend eternity with you, developing supernatural abilities, existing in society that values character over appearance. I'm not running from anything. I'm running toward the life I actually want." "What about your body?" Dante asked carefully. "You've spent 18 months learning to love your current form. Transformation will alter it slightly. Are you prepared for that?" "You said I'd keep my fundamental proportions," Serafina replied. "That I'd just become a vampire version of my current self." "That's fine. I've learned to love the body I have. Curves, softness, abundance, and all. Slight changes during transformation don't frighten me because I'm not defining my worth by specific appearance anymore. I'm beautiful now, and I'll be beautiful as a vampire. My confidence isn't dependent on exact measurements." "That's extraordinarily healthy perspective," Dante observed. "Most humans who've struggled with body image want transformation to drastically change their appearance. You're accepting that you'll remain fundamentally the same person, just with supernatural enhancements. That's mature attitude that suggests you're genuinely ready." "When can we proceed?" Serafina asked. "Whenever you want," Dante replied. "But I'd suggest 1 week. Give yourself time to be completely certain, to prepare mentally and emotionally. Then, if you still want this, we'll transform you." The week passed with Serafina growing more confident rather than less. She wasn't afraid of transformation or uncertain about her choice. She was excited, eager to become something more, ready to spend eternity with someone who'd shown her that beauty was far broader than Victorian society acknowledged. "I'm ready," she told Dante on the appointed evening. "I've spent 22 years being told my body was wrong, 18 months learning it was right. Now I want to spend eternity being everything I'm capable of becoming without human limitations constraining me. Transform me, Dante. Make me your vampire mate. Let's face immortality together." "One more thing," Dante said seriously. "After transformation, I'm going to call you my goddess. Not as figure of speech, but as honest description of how I see you. You've gone from believing you were shameful to recognizing you're divine. I want to spend eternity reminding you of that truth." "My goddess," Serafina repeated with smile. "I like the sound of that. It's certainly better than the fat coal daughter my family called me." "All right, Dante. I'm ready to become your goddess. Let's begin." The transformation process began with Dante draining approximately half of Serafina's blood, bringing her to death's edge. Then came the venom, burning through her system with fire that consumed her awareness. 3 days of excruciating pain followed, every cell dying and resurrecting as something supernatural. But Serafina had survived 22 years of psychological torment. Physical pain, however intense, felt almost manageable by comparison. What concerned her more was the uncertainty about her body. Dante had promised she'd keep her fundamental proportions. But what did that mean exactly? Would she still have the soft stomach she'd learned to appreciate? The curves she'd come to love? The substantial presence she'd finally accepted as beautiful? The transformation completed on the third day. The pain stopped abruptly, and Serafina opened eyes that now saw with supernatural clarity. She could hear sounds at impossible ranges, sense presences in ways she'd never imagined, feel strength flowing through her transformed body. But the first thing she did was look down at herself. She still had curves, still had softness, still had the abundant flesh that Victorian society had deemed excessive. Her body hadn't become thin during transformation. It had just become a supernatural version of what she'd always been. "I'm still fat," she said wonderingly. "You're still classical perfection," Dante corrected, appearing beside her with expression of awe. "My goddess, you're stunning. The transformation enhanced your beauty without changing your fundamental form. You're exactly what I promised. A vampire version of your magnificent self." Serafina moved to a mirror and studied her reflection with supernatural vision. Her features were slightly more symmetrical, her skin clearer, but her body remained substantially the same. Curves, softness, abundance, all of it present, just enhanced by vampire nature. "I was afraid transformation would make me thin," she admitted, "that I'd lose the body I'd finally learned to love. But I'm still me, just supernatural now." "You're more than you were, while remaining fundamentally yourself," Dante confirmed. "That's what vampire transformation does, enhances rather than replacing. And Serafina, you're breathtaking. Even more beautiful than you were as human, which I didn't think was possible." Serafina felt confidence flooding through her that had nothing to do with physical changes. She'd gone from believing her body was shameful to understanding it was beautiful, and transformation had validated that understanding rather than contradicting it. She wasn't beautiful despite her size or because transformation fixed her. She was beautiful exactly as she was, supernatural enhancements included. "How do you feel?" Dante asked. "Powerful," Serafina replied. "Not just physically, though I can sense the supernatural strength, but psychologically powerful. I went from being the fat, cold daughter society mocked to being the goddess you worship. From being told my body was wrong to knowing it's extraordinary. That's more profound transformation than any physical change could be." "You've always been extraordinary," Dante said gently. "You just needed someone to help you see it. But Serafina, the person you've become, confident, self-assured, genuinely comfortable in your own skin, that was always you. I just removed the obstacles your family placed between you and your authentic self." "Then thank you," Serafina said, "for seeing what they couldn't. For showing me that beauty isn't defined by narrow standards. For making me your goddess when society called me an embarrassment. Thank you for everything." "Thank you for choosing me," Dante replied. "My goddess." The first year of Serafina's vampire existence was revelatory in ways that transcended physical abilities. In supernatural society, her body type was completely unremarkable. Vampires came in all shapes and sizes, and no one cared about aesthetic standards that preoccupied humans. "You're the one who was mocked by humans?" a female vampire asked Serafina during their first supernatural social gathering. "Why? You look perfectly normal." Victorian humans have narrow beauty standards, Serafina explained. They prefer extreme thinness. My body doesn't match that ideal, so my family treated me as embarrassment. How peculiar, the vampire replied with genuine confusion. Why would anyone care about such arbitrary aesthetics? Your body is functional, healthy, attractive by any reasonable standard. Human obsession with specific proportions is bizarre. That interaction crystallized what Dante had been telling her for months. Human beauty standards were temporary fashion rather than absolute truth. In supernatural circles, no one judged her appearance because vampires had seen enough of history to recognize that beauty came in countless forms. But more meaningful than social acceptance was how Dante continued treating her. As vampire rather than human, his worship of her form intensified. "You're my goddess," he'd say regularly, the phrase becoming endearment rather than metaphor. "Divine perfection that I'm privileged to witness." "I'm just me," Serafina would protest, though she'd grown to accept the compliment rather than deflecting it. "You're extraordinary," Dante would correct. Classical beauty animated by supernatural power. The combination is breathtaking. Serafina discovered that vampire existence amplified the confidence she'd developed as human. Without constant judgment about her appearance, she could focus on developing abilities, pursuing interests, building life that had nothing to do with her sins. She trained in combat, studied supernatural history, developed friendships based on character rather than appearance. "You've blossomed since transformation," Dante observed after watching Serafina successfully defeat a 3,000-year-old vampire in training combat. Not just physically powerful, but confident in ways that transcend appearance entirely. "Because I'm not thinking about my body constantly," Serafina explained. "As human, I couldn't escape awareness that my appearance was judged by everyone I encountered. As vampire, no one cares what I look like. They care whether I'm strong, intelligent, capable. That shift in focus is liberating beyond anything I imagined." But she never forgot what human judgment felt like. She became advocate for humans struggling with body image, using her vampire platform to challenge societies that shamed people for not matching arbitrary standards. "You're changing how supernatural beings view human beauty standards," Dante observed as Serafina successfully convinced a vampire council to condemn societies that treated normal body diversity as pathological. "That's meaningful work." "I'm preventing what happened to me from happening to others," Serafina replied. "Every human who learns that body diversity is normal rather than shameful. Every culture that moves away from narrow beauty standards, that's one less person spending years believing they're defective. I can't change my own past, but I can influence countless futures." "You've gone from victim of cruel standards to advocate against them," Dante observed. "That's extraordinary growth." "I learned from you," Serafina said. "You showed me that beauty transcends fashion. Now I'm teaching others that same lesson. It's the least I can do after you gave me back my self-worth." "You always had self-worth," Dante corrected gently. "I just helped you remember it." 50 years after Serafina's transformation, she returned to Bath to witness how society had evolved, or more accurately, how it hadn't. Victorian beauty standards had shifted slightly, but the fundamental obsession with judging women's bodies remained unchanged. She encountered descendants of her family at a social gathering, great-nieces and nephews who'd heard stories about the fat Cole daughter who'd disappeared mysteriously decades earlier. They didn't recognize Serafina as that ancestor, but their conversation revealed that family attitudes hadn't improved. "Poor great-aunt Serafina," one young woman said. Grandmother said she was so large that father paid someone to marry her just to remove the embarrassment. Can you imagine? Being so undesirable your own father has to bribe someone to take you. That's not what happened, Serafina interrupted, unable to remain silent. Your great-aunt left because she found someone who actually valued her. Someone who recognized that beauty isn't defined by narrow standards. Someone who saw her as extraordinary rather than embarrassing. You knew her? The young woman asked, confused by how someone so young could have known someone from 50 years ago. I did, Serafina confirmed. And she wasn't undesirable. She was surrounded by people too limited to recognize her worth. There's a significant difference. But she was fat, another family member stated bluntly. That's objective fact, not subjective assessment. She had a body type that artists celebrated for thousands of years, Serafina corrected coldly. Renaissance masters would have competed to paint her. Greek sculptors would have used her as model for goddesses. Your inability to recognize beauty outside current fashion doesn't make her unattractive. It makes you blind to aesthetic diversity. That's an unusual perspective, someone observed. That's a historically informed perspective, Serafina replied. Beauty standards change constantly. What's celebrated in one era is mocked in another. Anyone who's studied aesthetic history understands this. The tragedy is that people like your great-aunt suffer because limited minds mistake temporary fashion for absolute truth. She left the gathering feeling both frustrated and determined. 50 years had passed, and human society still hadn't learned the fundamental lesson that body diversity was normal, and judging people for not matching narrow standards was cruel rather than rational. They haven't changed, she told Dante later. My family descendants still believe that fat bodies are inherently undesirable, still think appearance is more important than character, still make the same mistakes that tormented me. Humans have remarkably short memories, Dante observed. They don't remember that 50 years ago, standards were slightly different. They certainly don't consider that hundreds of years ago, standards were completely opposite. They just accept current fashion as absolute truth and judge accordingly. Then I need to keep advocating, Serafina decided. Keep challenging societies that shame normal body diversity. Keep teaching that beauty is broader than any single era's fashion. I can't change everyone, but I can influence some. And every person who learns to appreciate aesthetic diversity is progress. You've turned your trauma into purpose, Dante observed. The girl who was humiliated became the woman who prevents others from experiencing similar humiliation. That's not just survival. It's transformation of meaning itself. I learned from the best teacher, Serafina replied, kissing him gently. My goddess-worshipping vampire who showed me that beauty was always mine. I just needed eyes broad enough to see it. A century after Serafina's transformation, her advocacy work had influenced multiple human societies to broaden beauty standards. Not everywhere, not completely, but progress measured in millions of people who learned that body diversity was normal rather than pathological. You're changing human history, Dante observed as Serafina successfully convinced a major European nation to ban advertisements that promoted unhealthy thinness. That's extraordinary impact for someone who started as victim of the very standards you're now dismantling. I'm preventing what happened to me from happening to others, Serafina replied. Every human who grows up believing their body is acceptable regardless of size. Every culture that celebrates aesthetic diversity rather than enforcing narrow standards. That's victory over the cruelty I survived. I can't erase my own humiliation, but I can ensure fewer people experience similar treatment. Their relationship had deepened across decades into partnership that transcended mate bond. They complemented each other perfectly. Dante's historical perspective balanced by Serafina's personal experience with body shaming, his ancient wisdom enhanced by her passionate advocacy. "Do you ever regret the years you spent being humiliated?" Dante asked one evening, as they reflected on a century together. "I regret the cruelty and the pain," Serafina admitted, "but I don't regret the journey. Those 22 years of judgment taught me empathy for others facing similar treatment. They gave me motivation to advocate for change. They made me appreciate genuine love in ways people who've never been rejected cannot understand. So no, I don't regret the path that led me here. I just wish it hadn't required so much suffering." "That's profound wisdom," Dante observed. "I learned it from you," Serafina replied with a smile that still, after a century, made Dante's ancient heart flutter. "You taught me that trauma could become purpose, that suffering could generate compassion, that being rejected by limited minds meant nothing about actual worth. You showed me I was a goddess when society called me an embarrassment. That gift is more valuable than anything else you could have given me." "You were always divine," Dante said. "I just helped you see it." A century after her human death, vampire historians documented Serafina's story. The fat daughter who was humiliated became legendary vampire advocate who challenged beauty standards across multiple cultures. They called her the Divine One, the goddess who proved that bodies shamed by narrow minds could be celebrated by those with vision broad enough to recognize genuine beauty. But Serafina had simpler understanding. She'd been told her body was shameful, believed it for terrible years, then learned the truth, that shame belonged to those who judged, not those who were judged. That beauty was far broader than any single era's fashion. That divine recognition came from those who'd seen enough of aesthetics to know perfection when they found it. The fat daughter became the goddess. The humiliated girl became the celebrated woman. And she had eternity to continue proving that those mocked by limited minds are often worshipped by those with perspective broad enough to recognize that beauty, real, genuine, classical beauty, comes in forms temporary fashion often fails to appreciate. She was his goddess, and she'd finally learned to see herself that way too.